glad you joined us for another edition of Cornerstone Counseling Center's TV broadcast. My name is Ann Beal, and I'm joined today by David Dickerson, a counselor at Cornerstone. We're going to talk today about stress and crisis in people's lives. This is an area that we all struggle with, and we know that maybe you at this very moment are struggling with a crisis or stress in your life. And we just want you to know we do care. We don't know you through this medium of television, but we do care about you and your struggles, and we hope that you will join us for the next 30 minutes as we talk about a crisis in your life and just give you tips and let you see healthier ways to handle them. David, let's start by saying, do you agree that pretty much crisis and stress is inevitable in everyone's life?
Oh, I think so, Ann. I think in everybody's life there are going to be times of crisis, and what we hope is that most people will have only minor crises in their lives, but it's inevitable also that at some point in time, almost everyone is going to have a major crisis in their life. We deal with that a lot at the counseling center, and I think it's important for people to be able to understand what is going on in a crisis time to them and around them so that they can be better prepared to deal with them.
And you've been counseling a long time. I think you said 25 years.
Yeah, I have.
Have you been at Cornerstone the whole time?
No, I've been at Cornerstone since 1988. We formed Cornerstone just with two of us, and over the years we've grown to where we have 13 or 14 counselors on staff, but I've been in hospital situations and inpatient settings as well as in the private practice.
So hospitals, you've really seen crisis.
An awful lot of it, we sure have.
People in the middle of stress.
Yes, we sure have.
Well, I'm so glad you joined us today because this is a topic that everyone can benefit from, and you're just going to go over the stress cycle and what happens to our bodies and just how we can maybe calm down, take some deep breaths, and give us some better strategies.
Sure enough.
Okay, great.
You bet.
How would you like to start?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to, as we've talked about, is the fact that we can't avoid crisis in our lives. And one of the best things that we can do, if it's a minor crisis especially, is just catch ourselves overreacting to the circumstances. And sometimes the best thing that we can do is simply just to catch ourselves, take a deep breath, just hold it for a second and just blow it out then and just say, okay, how can I cope with this or how can I respond to this rather than react or overreact? It's probably one of the best ways to deal with one of those day in, day out kind of minor crises that we have in life. But when there's a heavier time of crisis, I think then we have to really take a good, honest look at where we are and who we're with and make sure that we seek out. Sometimes we even have to seek out help, whether it's with a family member or a trusted friend, a clergyman, or a professional counselor.
You know, I know that when a crisis hits, usually the first thing that I do is I panic a little bit. I mean, and then I catch myself later and I start calming down. Okay.
Yeah.
Calm down. Do most people, are they able to think through it initially, or do most people panic right in the beginning?
Well, I think a lot of people will either panic or at least react to it, and in reacting, it may turn into almost a panic situation if they don't learn how to respond in a healthy way. It's an interesting thing. The Chinese when they think of a crisis, there are two terms or two words in there that form the word crisis. One of them means danger, but the other means opportunity. So the Chinese mind thinks of a crisis as something where there's a potential for some danger. And when we think of a crisis, we think, oh my goodness, I'm in a really dangerous situation here, and I don't know how to cope with it. It's something I haven't practiced. It's not normal for me. As a matter of fact, in the change cycle, all of us have a status quo or a way that we live where we feel pretty balanced, and we feel like I can handle this on a day-in, day-out basis, even little minor crises that happen. But when a major crisis happens, what happens is that crisis event itself pulls us out of our status quo, and it makes us feel uneasy and awkward. And if we're not ready for it, or if we're not prepared in advance to think about how we're going to deal with it, sometimes it can get the best of us.
The status quo, that would be more like this morning when I left my house. I mean, every morning I do the same thing, and I feel the same way, and I have my routine, and I get my car, but if I was in a wreck on the way here, that would throw everything.
It sure would.
Out of whack.
It sure would. It'd really throw you off balance, wouldn't it?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I want you to stand up and just for just a second, and let me show you what that feels like. I know you already know, but I want you, as you're standing on both feet, you are balanced, aren't you? And you have that status quo kind of feeling.
Yes.
Now I want you just to stand on one foot for just a minute.
I can do this.
Okay. Now, how long do you think you can stand on one foot like that?
Not very long.
Not very long. Now, what would happen if something like this happened, and you can go ahead and sit down? But if something like that happened, it would be easy to overreact, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, in our situation here, it was a friendly exchange.
Right.
But if there were a real crisis that was happening where there wasn't that kind of lightheartedness about it, there would be a tendency to overreact to it, and then that panic would set in.
You know, when you had me stand on one leg, I could almost handle it. This is where I feel like when I get in the car, I'm going to handle this. But when you pushed me, I didn't have the skills or the abilities to catch myself.
That's right.
And so that would be very scary because you know you're just going to fall back and get hurt.
Exactly.
So in a crisis, when you don't have the ability, you've never been through that crisis before, you don't have the skills yet to handle it.
Exactly. That's the truth. The other thing is, when you ask people, they say, "Oh, I like change." Almost everybody will come and say, "Oh, I like when things change a bit."
Right.
But the truth of the matter is, we like change only when we can control it. That at other times, when something outside of us, like a car accident or even a death of a friend or a spouse or a family member or some other crisis like that takes place, that really is out of our control, and we don't know how to deal with it because we've never been there before. So it does make us feel real uneasy and out of control.
So when we haven't been through that specific crisis before and we don't know how to handle it, that makes us much more afraid.
Oh, I think it does. Not only does it make us afraid, but I think it almost sends us into almost a period, at least, of chaos in which our whole life changes. We're tempted. We want our old status quo back because we know what we can deal with at that point. And we want that return to normalcy. And that's one of the things that we strive for. But if a crisis is a major one, very often our lives are changed completely and are changed permanently because of that crisis event. And
like a person dying.
Oh, exactly.
They're no longer in our life.
That's right. Yeah. You betcha. And then things do become chaotic for a while because our thinking is more toward the old status quo, and we want to get back to that, but we realize we can't. So it really does become real scary. Okay.
When we start feeling the fear, there are certain things that happen to our body. I know when I'm at the panic stage, my body does certain things.
Sure it does.
Can you describe those? What usually happens?
You betcha. It's interesting. Dr. Hans Seeley, many years ago, developed what he called the general adaptation syndrome. And he discovered that when we are in that position, when we're really at our height of fear, the body within 8 seconds automatically, and this is out of our control too, it automatically sends epinephrine and norepinephrine, better known as adrenaline and noradrenaline, into every single cell of our body.
That's what makes our heart race.
Exactly. It does. Yeah, it makes our heart race. It makes our stomach feel queasy. Sometimes our muscles will tense up. Can't breathe, or we breathe much more rapidly because we have to get more oxygen to all of the muscle groups because what the body's preparing to do is, what Dr. Seeley says is the adrenaline and noradrenaline, they kind of fight each other, but they prepare our body for fright or flight or for fight. And what I've learned is that there are people who tend to be fighters. There are some people who tend to almost become paralyzed in fright and to stand there and don't do anything for sometimes a long time. And it really is a paralysis that goes on for them. And then some people want to just pick up and run.
Some people freeze.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. And sometimes that's the best thing to do.
Right. I know that I have to remember when I'm in a situation that I've experienced before, and I have a person there who's never experienced it, and they freeze or they get frightened, they just freak out. And I'm sitting there going, no, you need to do this, and I'm frustrated at them that they're not acting. I'm like, no, we need to do this, we need that, calm down. And I have to remind myself that they've never been through that.
That's
and here
right.
I am. So if they had seen me the first time I'd gone through it and I was frozen, but I'm trying to be real smart and go, no, we need to do this, we
That's
need
right.
to do that. And it can be frustrating.
Oh, it can be enormously frustrating for not only the person who's experiencing it, but for everybody around them. And I think that's one of the times when we really need to just gather ourselves and realize that, gosh, this is something new happening to them. And if I've been through that, really I can be a good coach or a good mentor for them, but I have to be patient with them because they're going through that at that moment. And they're going to handle it differently. Everybody handles a crisis or stress in different kinds of ways. And if I've handled it one way, I typically want everybody to handle it the way I want them, the way that I did it, as far as that's concerned.
And as a counselor with our clients, when they get in the fright stage, it's our job to help them, breathe deeply, let's think clearly, to talk them through that.
Right.
And so it's fight, fright,
or flight.
Or flight.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So it'd be like fight, freeze, or run. Or, So fight, fright,
basically.
Flight. Okay.
Sure enough. And sometimes running is the best thing to do.
I like that one.
A lot of us do, to be honest. But the truth is we can't keep running, and sooner or later we really have to face the facts that something traumatic has happened to us, in a crisis at least. And we have to be willing to persevere through that chaos that all of that creates and start integrating some new ways of living sometimes, especially, for example, as you mentioned, if there's a death of someone in the family. We really have to start integrating that into our whole lifestyle so that we can learn to cope in better kinds of ways. And that integration may take a lot of different forms.
But is that where we come in?
I think it is. I think that's where we as counselors come in, or a family member, a trusted friend. A professional counselor certainly can help with that, and I always recommend it, even if there's just one or two sessions, just to really bounce things off of somebody who really is objective, who can do some reality testing, and where you can say to them, I'm thinking about doing this or this or this because of this crisis and all the chaos that has created in my life. Is that realistic? And hopefully a good therapist or a good friend will be able to say, well, yeah, this is realistic. This, maybe you need to examine it.
I know sometimes it's hard for us, friends and family. We don't really know whether, first of all their advice is different. And because I really do try to go to my friends. And it's interesting that the friend, I pick the friend based on kind of the reaction that I want.
We do.
If I know a friend I have a friend that's real supportive of my husband and knows him real well, and I know will say, okay, and he doesn't normally do that. But if I have a friend that's like my best friend, and she'll say, I can't believe he did that. It depends on who I call. But to get a real non-biased opinion sometimes and some real advice that I feel that I can listen to because I'm paying for it. They don't know me. They'll listen to my side of the story.
Right.
They'll tell me. And so I pretty much try to use all the resources for the integration stage.
Oh, I think it's very wise to do that. The more input that you can get, the more realistic you can become in how you deal with it. And as far as the new outcome is concerned, what we're trying to help people achieve is a new status quo, and hopefully something that's healthier than even that they had before. And once they can bounce some things off of those trusted friends or a counselor or advisor or a mentor and say, okay, this is really the course of action that I need to take, the integration phase is pretty well through. And then all the person really has to do is start practicing.
But what if they're by themselves? I mean, lots of times crisis or a major situation can happen fast. It can happen. How can they, they can use some of the breathing exercises to calm themselves down, but how can they get the integration they need if they don't have anybody else around and they have to calm down enough to try to make a clear decision?
Well, that's very difficult for a lot of folks to do, especially when they are alone. I think the deep breathing is awfully good. Just stepping back and trying to look at things as objectively as possible as they can, although they're right in the middle of the fray, so it's difficult for them to do that. So I think when they're by themselves, they really have to, to be honest with you, is turn to somebody. And if they don't have a friend or a family member nearby, if they did nothing less than look in the phone book for a nearby, church or a counseling center or something like that. There are crisis hotlines that are available, and I think that's one of the biggest fears is, and we don't like talking about this, is when a person is alone and they're going through all that, sometimes there is a thought of suicide.
Yes.
And the first thing that they need to do is to pick up the phone and call a suicide hotline or a psychiatric hospital or a counseling center and really work through that.
Because it's hard to get perspective when you're in the middle of a crisis.
Oh, it's impossible.
And it's hard to see the big picture. And they'll choose a long-term solution to a short-term problem.
Mm-hmm.
So the breathing is helpful. I know for me that I just tell myself that I will not make any major decision during a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I won't, and that I won't run. I'll try to sit, unless there's a bear.
Yeah.
Oh, but then if there's a bear, you're not supposed to run.
That's what I've heard. I've never encountered one, but sometimes our first tendency would be to run, though. I think anybody's would be.
I think I might. Okay. But I know I just try to stay calm and until I can think, and try not to act until I can think clearly.
Sure. Any decision that's made in a time of real heightened emotion is probably not going to be the best decision.
It's more of a short term.
It really is.
Till you get to where you can get help.
Sure enough.
Okay. What's after integration? The practice?
Well, if a person, once they decide on a course of action, then what they have to do is just start practicing that. And the truth of the matter is, I think they have to practice it to the third power. Just practice. Then it's that practice, as a matter of fact, that will help deliver you almost into that whole new status quo, where you really start achieving that sense of balance finally that you were looking for.
What would that look like? Can you give us an example of how they would do that?
Oh, I think that, for example, if there's a loss of a loved one, for example, and they've worked there all the way through the chaos, and they've decided through the integration phase that they're going to become actively involved in, if they're alone, for example, but they're going to become actively involved in some volunteer organization, or they're going to go to work, go back to work perhaps, or something like that. Then it's just doing that. It's getting up every day and saying, okay, this is Wednesday, it's my day to volunteer at the library. So even though I don't feel like it, and that's a big part of it. Even if I don't feel like it, if I've decided it's the right thing to do, then I have to go ahead and do that. And that practicing doing that, as a matter of fact, I believe, makes those feelings come around because it becomes more familiar. We do know what to expect. And then I think we do arrive at that new sense of balance.
I know that one of the things I see often is, we have someone who's learning new ways of dealing with life and learning to be stronger. And yet when a crisis comes, they immediately, jump back to what they used to do, which was either run, not talk to anybody, or say they want to kill themselves. And they're not thinking with their new acquired skills. They're not thinking about, okay, I'm healthier now. And that's when I was a child, or that was when that happened to me. And I don't need to do those things anymore because I can talk to my friends, or I can. And so they immediately, when a crisis comes, often revert back to the way they used to handle it, or the easiest way to handle it, instead of the healthiest way to handle it.
Exactly.
And I know with my clients, I try to work with them on, okay, what are better ways to do this next time? You don't have to think about hurting yourself or killing yourself, or running to your parents. Maybe let's start thinking of new ways next time that you can handle this better. And so I just have them, brainstorm about that, and we practice those.
That's right.
In small situations, so when a big crisis happens, they'll be able to handle it better.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And again, it's just using that act as if a premise that says, even though I don't feel like doing this, I know it's the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it, rather than revert back to those old ways of dealing with it that probably are ineffective.
It's hard, though, if you're used to doing something for a long time. Or it's hard if it's different, to learn a different way of doing things.
Sure. We're creatures of habit.
I am.
Well, all of us are. We like our routines. That's how we started this conversation, as a matter of fact. We really like for life to be pretty much the same way day in and day out. But when a crisis occurs, it changes everything. And the result is that if we can't go back to that sense of normalcy that we had because of the crisis, we have to make our way through that whole cycle to really be successful. And the neatest part about it is when a person does that, I believe that there is really wonderful growth that happens to them. And they can look back on that whole cycle, that whole series of events that happened, and they can see how they persevered through the crisis. They can see how they integrated this new way of living and how they practiced it. And now gosh, I feel stronger. I feel better and much healthier.
We sure hate when we're in it, though.
Oh, of course.
I think we all know down the road it'll make us stronger or better. Sometimes we have trouble believing it when we're in it. I always hate when crisis comes.
Oh, yeah, you betcha. Well, we have just got so many different kind of feelings. When a crisis first hits, life is going along like this, and it almost feels like the floor or the rug's been pulled out from under us.
Yeah.
And we almost feel like we're falling. And there are feelings like numbness and shock and denial and anger and emotion. Just a lot of emotion happens that way with folks. And, when you're falling, as in the illustration when I had you stand up, there is just a tremendous feeling of uncertainty. So we have all of those feelings that are just real hard to deal with.
I know what was real helpful to me was to know that there's a process when I'm in a crisis or something real painful's happened. It's helpful to know, okay, I remember when I started feeling when I was angry, I held on to that for a long time, and then I had a friend once I got past the anger, I just felt real sad for a while. And I had a friend tell me that's part of the process.
Exactly.
Because you've finally been able to just realize that they're gone, and instead of being angry so you don't have to deal with the sadness, now you're just sad, and you're adjusting to the fact that they're really gone, and now life without them is going to be different. And after that, I started going back up again. And so it was almost knowing that the lowest point was just the sadness, that I had to go through the panic and the shock and the anger, and so lots of times, what comes after anger? Is it unhappiness?
Well, I think that there's anger, and I think there's also just a real searching for meaning in this. What in the world has happened to me, and how am I going to survive this? So I think there are real searchings that go on once we process through the anger.
And no denials there, or you just don't believe it. That was mine.
Well, as a matter of fact, anytime any kind of a major crisis happens, what are the first two words out of most people's mouths? Oh, no.
No way.
Or I can't believe this is happening. And that's just one way of denying the reality of what's happening.
When do you start getting better? Because I noticed you said on your chart there's the panic stage and all that, but when you start getting better, how do you know when you're starting to come out of it?
It's a good question. I think first I want to run back to just one thing you said very quickly, is the fact that it's okay to feel sad and to do that heavy sorrowing or grieving as far as that's concerned. And I think that's one of the ways that you know that you're getting better, because you're coming out of that. You don't feel quite so sad. You don't feel quite so mournful, and you can start looking ahead rather than looking backward. I think that's a tremendously important thing. There's some feelings of loneliness that we experience, but I think even with that, I think we start also seeing that we're getting back into circulation. And instead of just sitting by and looking out the window and feeling sorry for ourselves, and being lonely, is the fact that, okay, I'm going to get back into circulation. I'm going to get back into my social group or my church group or even family, as far as that's concerned. And we start getting back involved in life.
But we're different now, aren't we?
Oh, I think so. I think so. With this loss, we have changed. So we really and truly are a different person. But I think that if we will go ahead and give ourselves the freedom to say, okay, I am at this point in the process, and I know that this won't last, and go ahead and experience it, but then start working through it, really does become a very healthy thing to do.
So just go through the trial to the other side, and then it'll be better and you'll have growth.
Well, as a matter of fact, I believe so. As a matter of fact, I think that once a person has experienced a crisis and worked all the way through it, if they hadn't experienced a crisis, life would have gone this way. But all of a sudden, because of the crisis and the success they've had in working through it, I think they're working even on a higher plane.
I think so too.
Oh, yeah.
I know that for me, I feel we just moved, and it wasn't a bad crisis. It was a good crisis, but there was stress. It was very stressful, and it fits into your cycle of we were in our old house, And we did the move, which was very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And we got in our new house, and right about now we're starting to be there, and things are better. But it is very different.
Oh,
And
sure.
our whole life is different. We're in a different place, a different location. We don't know people, so we're starting to try to get plugged in. And the kids are meeting friends, and so everything's calming down. So you can have stress and have a time of very high stress, even when it's a good thing, and you still somewhat go through the process.
Oh, you really do. You really do. It doesn't have to be a traumatic kind of a thing that happens. It can be something wonderful that's happening, like moving, or even starting a new job,
Mm-hmm.
or a whole new career, or all kinds of things. There is going to be stress, and there is going to be this whole cycle of having to change and work through it.
What are some ways that you think a person, when they get back to their new status quo, when they get to their new status quo,
Mm-hmm.
that can really help them be stable, so that the next time a crisis comes, they'll be able to, the one that they're not familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like you can learn things, even if it's a different crisis next time, that you can learn how to be calmer, maybe not panic as much. Can you think of ways for them?
Oh, I think so. I think 2 or 3 things that come to mind immediately. One is to just take a good look at themselves and see how they've grown,
Mm-hmm.
and even look inside and themselves and say, I struggled for a while, but I really did work through that quite well. And I think it's just feeling a little bit better about yourself, or maybe having some nice self-talk.
It's always a topic we can keep talking about, because stress affects many people, and there's many ways it affects us. We thank you for watching Living Well.